An NCAA investigation cut down Sharife Cooper's freshman season to just 12 games, but the Auburn point guard did enough to show that he is one of the best point guard prospects in the 2021 NBA draft. This is Florence Sealing. Let's break him down. Auburn fans who were anxiously waiting to see five-star freshman Sharife Cooper debut for the Tigers had to wait a little bit longer than expected. Cooper missed the first 12 games of the season because of an NCAA investigation into his eligibility. But upon being cleared, Cooper quickly made an impact. At 6'1", 180 pounds, Cooper should be considered one of the premier point guards in the 2021 draft. His mix of driving, and especially passing, are hard to overlook, but he still has many questions to answer about the rest of his game. The first and most important thing about Sharife Cooper is that he is probably the best passer in this year's NBA draft, and that upon entering the NBA, he will also be one of the best passers in the league. There is no understating just how good Cooper's passing was during his freshman year. The Auburn point guard dished out 8 assists per game and had an astronomical 52% assist percentage. That means that Cooper assisted more than half of his teammates' buckets whenever he was on the floor. Think of any pass and Cooper will be able to deliver it. That can be in the pick and roll, as we saw during the first few clips of the video, or he can also do another thing he excels at, which is finding bigs above the rim. This is something that should translate for sure to the NBA, and given that he is already very good at it, it will be even easier for Cooper to connect with lobs at the next level. Cooper can pass on the move, with one hand, with two hands, to every angle imaginable. I basically have no concerns about him in terms of making reads and executing them, which is rare when it comes to a 19-year-old prospect. I do not want to go overboard with Cooper's passing, even though that is pretty easy to do, but check out these highlights against Alabama. Keep in mind that this was Cooper's first ever college game, and still, he had 9 assists. To me, this shows that Cooper is a quick learner. He had practice with his teammates, of course, but it's an entirely different thing to do this in a game after having no rhythm at all. However, Cooper is also fantastic at making the less flashy passes. He will find the little crevices that defenses eventually expose and exploit them to his team's advantage. Against Ole Miss, Cooper gets the screen and goes left. He quickly notices that the opponent did not rotate properly and finds Jalen Williams for a wide open 3. In this next clip, Cooper pushes the ball full court against LSU. They form a wall to try to stop him, so he looks back and spots the man that Javonte Smart left open in transition to stop the drive. Versus Alabama, it's simple enough. Cooper always puts tons of pressure on the opponent with his drives, so Herb Jones stays home. Cooper correctly finds a wide open Williams again in the corner, and even though he gets blocked, it is the right read. Here against Georgia, JT Thor is coming up to set the pick. The Georgia defender on the near side of your screen sees this and comes over to blitz, but Cooper is quick to spot this and find a completely abandoned Jamal Johnson. Finally, Cooper gets rolling downhill using the screen and Alabama's number 14 sinks because he thinks that the lob is coming. But instead, Cooper makes the tough pass across his body for the 3. I could go on and on for an entire video about Cooper's passing, but there are other parts of his game that I want to break down. Still, one staple that we must take a look at when it comes to Cooper is how he generates wide open 3s. This is where his ability to both attack the basket and read the defense comes together to form the perfect mix. Cooper is a master at these types of passes. He commands so much attention but keeps his peace of mind to not get rushed or sloppy. Once Cooper gets into the 3-point arc, but especially when he gets into the paint, you're in trouble. Because either you take a chance on stopping Cooper's quickness, which is easier said than done at the college level, or you stay on Auburn's shooters. It's just not possible to do both, and the credit has to go to Auburn for building a great roster with complementary pieces. But at the end of the day, the credit also has to go to Cooper for making these passes and timing them to perfection. Take a look at this pass against LSU. Literally, all of the Tigers defenders end up on Cooper by the end of the shot clock, and it's easy for him to find the wide open Allen Flanigan. The big improvement area for Cooper's passing is his turnovers, although I'm not overly worried about them. Sure, Cooper turned the ball over about 4 times per game, but let's look further into that. First, as we've seen, Cooper constantly makes the right reads. I do not have concerns about him being selfish or sloppy with the ball. The second thing that's worth mentioning is Cooper's insane usage rate. Auburn played through Cooper about 33% of the time, which is comparable to Trae Young this season in the NBA. Cooper proved that he could handle that load, but when you have the ball in your hands that much, you are going to turn the ball over sooner or later. And even then, Cooper assisted almost twice as much as he turned the ball over. Finally, the last thing that makes me unbothered by Cooper's turnovers is his turnover percentage. He turned the ball over 18 times per 100 possessions, which is improvable, but really not that bad. That figure would put Cooper in the company of Chris Paul, for example, at Wake Forest. Cooper's pattern of getting into the paint to do damage continues in regards to his scoring. Despite only being 6'1" and weighing 180 pounds, Cooper is surprisingly physical with his driving game. Cooper does not mind finishing through contact, taking bumps, or forcing the drive through his opponent's chest. He has a very strong upper body that allows him to play bigger than he actually is. When you combine that with his quickness, Cooper is very dangerous when he starts rolling downhill. I'll touch on this a bit later, but even when Cooper is unable to cleanly get to the rack, he is still robust and stubborn enough to trundle his way there. The majority of Cooper's field goal attempts came at the rim. You may have noticed just now that I said most of Cooper's field goal attempts came at the rim. That's because the area that he actually took the most shots in was from the free throw line. Cooper's physicality and toughness is often rewarded with favorable foul calls. Maybe this is not the most appealing basketball to watch, but it is very effective. Cooper shot 103 free throws during his 12 games at Auburn, meaning that he was taking almost 9 foul shots per game. For comparison, Cooper took 87 shots at the rim, 42 point jumpers, and 57 threes. Often, Cooper is fouled before he even actually gets to the basket. A lot of the time, he gets the whistle when he is just starting his drive. I touched on Cooper's quickness earlier, but here is where I have to make an important distinction. In my opinion, yeah, he's quick, but not necessarily explosive. Cooper does not have a super strong first step, rather it takes him a little extra second to load up and charge towards the rim. So while Cooper maybe is not a quick twitch athlete, this second step that I am bringing up might actually help him because of his playing style. First, Cooper gets into his opponent, and then when he finally takes off on his drive, the contact is already there and the foul is called. But while Cooper gets plenty of joy from his drives, there is one very notable and important improvement area for him. Like I covered, Cooper will take most of his shots at the rim, which is a fine choice. Those are legitimately the highest efficiency shots in basketball. However, Cooper's actual efficiency is not optimal. Cooper only made 51% of his shots at the rim, and ideally, you want that number to be much higher. For example, other guard prospects like Tre Mann, Jaden Springer, or Jalen Suggs all made more than 60% of their shots at the basket. Cooper plays really tough and physical, which is great, but when you are just over 6 feet tall, there are some limitations you ultimately cannot overcome. One of these hurdles that is very hard for Cooper to jump over is that he will have to work harder than most players to not be bothered by length. He already struggled with this at the college level, which makes me worry about how he will do against taller, bigger, and better athletes in the NBA. Too often, Cooper will kind of get caught under the basket or below his defender if he is not just outright getting blocked. The Auburn point guard saw plenty of rejections during his year in Alabama, and although he continued to play fearlessly, it is something to keep in mind. I am particularly worried about one of the games Cooper played against Kentucky. Although the Wildcats had a terrible year, they still had a roster with NBA caliber athletes. Cooper had a very difficult time attacking the basket against them, especially against a rim protector like Isaiah Jackson. This is why developing an in-between game will be important for him. Cooper will not always be able to get to the rim, so he needs to be able to decelerate and get into a little floater or short jumper. So far, the signs have been mixed, but I would say that Cooper needs to continue working on this type of shot so that it can become a regular fixture in his arsenal. What Cooper needs are possessions like this, where he drives but then pulls back before getting all the way to the basket, where he can sometimes get stuffed. When analyzing Cooper's offensive game, it is crucial to take a look at his three-pointer. I am pretty confident that this is going to be Cooper's swing skill at the next level, and it desperately needs some major improvement. Cooper made just 23% of his shots from beyond the arc during his sole season at Auburn. It isn't like he was shy about letting the threes fly either, taking about 5 per game. You will immediately notice Cooper's terrible form. Instead of shooting a basketball fluidly, it almost looks like he is tossing a medicine ball over his head. His shot is incredibly stiff and slow, and I expect it to see majorly reworked once Cooper is in the NBA. The good part is that there is no way his three-pointer can get any worse. He made the occasional deep three, sure, but he is really a non-factor from the perimeter. In some of my other videos, I have touched on spot-up shooting a fair amount. For example, I mentioned both for Scottie Barnes and BJ Boston how making those open threes would really help open up the rest of their games. In Cooper's case though, I think the pull-up three-point shooting is actually more important. Of course, it's nice if he makes his spot-up shots, but ultimately, I don't expect him to get too many of those since Cooper will have the ball in his hands the majority of the time. Instead, what Cooper has to work on is avoiding situations like these. We know that he just wants to drive into the paint and shoot or pass, but his defender is just going to keep going under in the pick and roll to dare him to shoot. In turn, that takes away Cooper's space. And since he is not a proficient outside shooter, it hurts the rest of his team by default. First of all, let's be clear and admit that Sharife Cooper has a poor reputation on defense. In all fairness, most of that is warranted, but I think it is important to be balanced and admit that he also had some encouraging possessions this year. Cooper will always be limited as a defender simply because he will give up size most of the time, but I think he could one day be a passable positional defender if he chooses to be. For example, he keeps up with Scottie Pippen Jr. on his drive here and ends up drawing the charge. Cooper more or less does the same thing against Kentucky here. First, he stays attached to Davion Mintz, and then he once again provokes the offensive foul. However, it is evident right now that there is a lot more bad than good with Cooper's D. Everything starts with just being engaged on this end of the floor, and Cooper often is not. Take a look at these possessions, where Cooper completely falls asleep. He is ball watching to such an extent that it is very easy for the opposing team to back cut him and get a great look right under the basket. Then, there is also Cooper's laziness, which can manifest itself in a number of ways. These defensive problems are not because of physical limitations, but rather a lack of focus. For example, these closeouts illustrate Cooper's commitment on the defensive end. Or this possession here, where Cooper is lazy switching so the other Auburn defender is late contesting the three. But it gets even worse. Cooper makes no effort at all to box out, and then the ensuing offensive rebound ends up in 2 points for Alabama down the stretch of the game. Then there are also the times where Cooper will try to take the charge and fail. Maybe he would get scored on during these possessions anyways, but I think there is no harm in at least trying to guard them properly. But by far, the most frustrating part of Cooper's defense is when he just does not care at all about containing his man. More often than not, Cooper will make no effort whatsoever at staying in front of his attacker. This lack of responsibility is alarming to me, because when you combine these lackluster possessions with the ones we saw earlier where Cooper actually competes on D, all we see here is that he simply does not want to put in the effort. Cooper, instead, would rather try to gamble. This is an undisciplined way of playing defense, but it is not something new in prospects. Many young players, especially those with a big offensive burden, are more concerned with getting the steal or highlight transition dunk, so they will jump into passing lanes or reach in. What usually happens then is that a big defensive hole will actually open up, such as here against Ole Miss that ends in the made floater. First of all, let's get this out of the way. I think that Sharife Cooper is a lot of fun to watch. I think his passing is great, he has a lot of creativity, and just overall he exudes charisma on the court. However, I do have 3 main concerns about Sharife Cooper's game, which I think that his future will hinge on. The first one, as we have seen, is his drive and kick out game, or his drive and then he can get up and shoot a layup or just force himself into the defender and draw the foul. But I do have some concerns about how that will play out at the NBA level, so stick with me here. The second worry I have, or just the second point I guess that I need to make here, is whether Cooper will even be able to get into the paint in the NBA. Because as I broke down during the video, sure, Cooper is quick, and you know, he is very forceful and tough once he gets downhill. But at the end of the day, he will be faced off against better and much superior athletes than him at the NBA level. And right now, I'm just not sure if his explosiveness will be up to par. My third and most important concern is his outside shot, his three-pointer. Because I think that his NBA future, or at least the possibility of him having a large role in the NBA, hinges entirely on that. At the college level, you can get away with being a point guard that can't really shoot the ball from the outside. But at the NBA, that's a lot harder. If defenses don't respect Cooper's outside shot, if they don't care about him shooting the three, then they have all the liberty, freedom, and space in the world to just pack the paint, clog the lanes, and make it so that he cannot make an impact doing what he does best, which is driving and passing the ball. Ultimately, I enjoy Cooper as a player, but those three concerns for me, they're all interlinked, and I have serious concerns about them. As always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, especially on this double upload week. Leave a comment below telling me what you think of Sharife Cooper, what you think his role will be in the NBA, and if you enjoy the channel, make sure to subscribe. From now on, the new videos will be released on Sundays. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time.